Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a wonderful show for you this evening. Captain Lynn Rippelmeyer is here, and we are going to learn all about her history, flying the 747, and so many other wonderful stories. Before we get started, just a few tips. First of all, the SocialFlight Fly to Win Challenge is in full swing right now, and we are giving away a Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset. So be sure to go and check that out. All you have to do is get the free SocialFlight mobile apps for Apple and Android devices, or check out SocialFlight.com. You need the mobile apps in order to go out and check in at your local airport or at any airports that you fly to. You get points for your check-ins, and even one check-in gets you entered into win in the contest. Get multiple check-ins and get onto our leaderboard, and you have additional entry in order in that contest to win that Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset. We just continue to give away wonderful prizes here, and it's just a great way to support general aviation and get you out there and flying as much as possible. And even if you're not in the market for that headset, you can actually just open up SocialFlight, check it out, and find one of the thousands of aviation events or destinations near you to get you out there and flying this weekend and every weekend to come. Now, another quick thing is, of course, tonight's broadcast will be part of the SocialFlight podcast. That is available on all podcast services, so you can get that on your phone, listen to it during your drive, etc. And also our learning system. Just go on to SocialFlight and you'll see an icon for the FAST team, the FAA learning system that we have, where you can watch videos in there and take quizzes for wings credit, as well as AMT, that's aviation maintenance technician courses, and also credits towards an IA renewal if you happen to be an airframe and power plant mechanic with an inspection authorization. Tonight's broadcast is brought to you by Avidyne. Avidyne, we're just so thrilled. They're such a strong supporter of SocialFlight, and their IFD 440, 540, and 550 systems are just wonderfully great systems to fly behind. And with the recent announcements, that's the old Garmin 430 and 530 systems are just not going to get supported anymore. It's really important that you can get a slide-in replacement and basically be able to upgrade over lunch. Essentially, if you bring it to one of those shops, they can slide in, configure it, get you ready to go. I love flying behind Avidyne equipment and would not trade it for anything, because it's just so easy, even when I'm flying complex, hard IFR, to just deal with reroutings and all sorts of other stuff. They're great units, so I sincerely do love it and can't wait to see their new Vantage system when that comes out. Now, tonight's guest, beginning as a flight attendant for TWA, Lynn Rippelmeyer blazed an unprecedented path from cabin to cockpit. She became a pilot, setting a number of firsts along the way, from being the first or part of the first all-female crew of a scheduled airline in 1977 to the first female captain of a transatlantic Boeing 747 in 1984. During her career, she flew aircraft ranging from a Cub on floats, straight floats, to the DeHavilland twin Otter and Boeing airliners, including the 727, the 737, the 747, and even the 787. Her decades-long career paved the way toward gender equality in the airlines and remains an icon for young women looking towards the skies to this day. And that is shown by the fact that her uniform resides in the Smithsonian Museum. Her two books, Life Takes Wings, which I have a copy of right here and absolutely love, and the about to be released Life Takes Flight are absolutely outstanding. I literally could not put them down from the time that I started reading them. I'm thrilled to have her with us tonight. I'm going to bring her on the line right now. Please welcome to SocialFlight Live, Captain Lynn Rippelmeyer. How are you doing?
Hi. Doing great, thanks.
Thank you so much for taking time to join us here on the show. And I also appreciate, because as I understand it, you are in a hotel room right now with a Seaboard World reunion, a reunion of pilots from the first time that you had the opportunity to fly the 747. I don't want to fast forward too much, but that's where you are now. Is that right?
That's true. We're here in Cocoa Beach. We spent the day visiting the Kennedy Space Center and catching up on 40 years. So yeah, welcome to my hotel room.
Isn't that wonderful? Now, I'd like you to take us back because your story and how all of this gets started, it reads like a fiction novel. I mean,
Yeah.
it really does. So how did you, tell me a little bit about childhood and getting started. How did you, first of all, find your way into being a flight attendant and then get the inspiration and the ability to actually start flight lessons from that position?
It is quite a story that I felt like I did need to write it down. I grew up on a farm in Southern Illinois. I know some of our other friends have been talking about how their fathers were in the military. No, my father was a farmer. We grew wheat and corn and soybeans and pigs and cows, and I had a horse, and that's as close as I could get to flying. I would pretend that horse was Pegasus, right up on top of the hills, and pretend it could sprout wings, and I could fly. And so I imagined it, and I'd wave at the planes that were flying overhead. They flew the pipeline, they said, some, I guess, oil pipeline that went underneath our fields, and I'd wave at them, and they'd rock their wings back, and I'd imagine what it must look like up there. And may have said to somebody at that time, you know, wouldn't it be fun to be a pilot? And go, yeah, you can't do that, you're a girl. And it was true. My choices at the time, like all women, were to be either a nurse or a teacher, was what I was told. So I went to school with a, excuse me, a teaching scholarship at the University of Illinois, and student taught for a little bit in inner city Chicago. And when the principal didn't appreciate my innovative teaching ideas, is how I like to think of it, I didn't get the encouragement that I was hoping for to go into the teaching field, which I really enjoyed and I think I would have been good at. A girlfriend was going for an interview at TWA. So I went along with her to keep her company, and we both ended up getting hired and moved to New York to fly. And the 727 had just come online with TWA in 1972. And it was the junior airplane. None of the other flight attendants wanted to fly it. And the junior position on the airplane was climbing those circular stairs to serve the cockpit, because nobody really wanted to deal with the pilots. Nothing against pilots, I am one, but at that time, sexual harassment had not been coined yet. And it was fun for the guys to use the flight attendants to pull jokes on and make fun of, and for entertainment. I quickly learned that if I asked a lot of questions about the airplane and their job and what was going on and how we were staying in the air and sitting behind the flight engineer, what everything on the flight engineer panel was about, we could have an intelligent conversation, and I actually learned something. And it was worth it to me to be the view, as all pilots know, is just beautiful up there. I mean, you get to see sunrises and sunsets and the world from 7 miles up, crossing the Atlantic, the Alps turning pink at sunrise, the moon rising on a clear night, making a ribbon of light on the, it's just, anyway, it was gorgeous. So I liked spending time up there, learned a lot about airplanes and flying. And then because of a pilot strike, worked on a boat, helped the guy get the boat to a lake in Lake Champlain. Some friends came in to say welcome him back, and in a little Piper Cub on floats, and offered me a ride. And looking at the instruments, I knew what the instruments were from being in the 747, but the contrast of, you know, when I look at the 747, it's so huge. It's amazing the thing can get into the air. And then looking at this little Cub, kind of the same thing in the other extreme. It was so tiny and fragile. And even when you touched it, yeah, it was fabric, that this thing's going to get into the air. But the gentleman took me up for a flight, and I had a blast. And so he and his wife were instructors, and they liked having an excuse to take their little toy up into the air. So they offered flying lessons for the summer. And I could think of nothing that I would have loved more. I mean, it's the best gift, the gift of wings. I mean, how
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, to be able to, yeah, give somebody that gift to be able to fly.
Did you find that taking that moving into the role of being a flight attendant at that point, was that something in itself that that attracted you? I mean, here you are, that was your first, you coming out of teaching, and that was your first opportunity there. What kind of drew you to that lifestyle to kick that off?
Well, that's it, exactly. You said it, the lifestyle. It was not a 9 to 5, and it was different every time. You got to meet amazing people. You got to see the world, literally. And then the side benefits, the travel privileges are incredible. Because of those travel privileges, I got to climb the Matterhorn and sail, sail through French Polynesia. It opens up the world to you.
Wow.
As a flight attendant, even.
Yeah.
It's just that it's more fun doing the flying
Yes.
than the serving. But it was an introduction into the world of aviation.
Was it a natural progression for you to have that curiosity in the cockpit and to try to draw out as much as you could from that?
I think I have a natural curiosity about wherever I am and whatever is going on, and I love to learn about my environment. And so since I was there, that was the natural thing to be asking questions about, I think. I was always interested in how things worked. So yeah, having an explanation of how a jet engine works, or how the airplane works in general, how the parts and pieces come together to allow people to be in that environment and travel. So it was, yeah, I think it served me well to introduce me in that way. Yes.
At what point was it the Cub, or was it when you were actually flying for the airlines that you started, or not flying, but flying with the airlines as flight attendant, that you started to kind of get that bug of, this is really something I want to find a way to do?
Oh, solo did it. I didn't expect to be able to solo in that Cub. It was their baby. It was older than me. I mean, I think the Edo floats had been made in, I don't know, sometime in the 40s. And so, like I said, it was just, and it was just for fun. There was no reason for me to get a license. There were no female pilots. There was no goal. It was just a fun thing to do. And I couldn't even get my private license in it, because you can't do the cross-country flights or the soft and short field landings. But they were giving me all the ground school. We were doing all the exercises that I would need. And then one day, towards the end of the summer, and I knew we were going to have to take the plane out of the water because the lake freezes over. And so one day we cut the lesson a little bit short, and we're drifting into shore, and my instructor taps me on the shoulder and hands me this piece of paper. And it was unusual, because usually he was always flying in the back and I had to get in the front. And this time he was sitting in the front and he had me get in the back. And I'd swim out to the plane and wrap up in a towel and fly. So he gives me this piece of paper that says, "Be back in 10." And I hear this splash, and he's jumped out of the plane, and he's turning the plane. Well, it's weather vaning into the wind, so I can tell. He goes, "You're gone." And the only way I could get back was to take off and come back, and he's swimming to shore. So that was my solo. A little bit of a unique way to solo, I guess, but I can remember being up there. I mean, the plane took off so much faster and easier without, with just me in it, and thinking about all the people that had done that. And I'd heard, you don't come back from a solo the same person. Now that you can do this. And so I just had the best time following the outline of the island and doing all the things that we had done with an instructor, but it was just me. And then doing some touch and goes on the way back. And yeah, I was addicted. I thought this is how I want to spend as much time. And I knew it was going to be expensive. So as much money as I can put together and as much time as I've got, this is it. But again, it was going to have to be a hobby. I did hear that women could be instructors. So I thought that may be how I could feed my addiction or pay for that time, was to gradually get my instructor's license. And then I had happened to see first class passenger was reading the private pilot handbook. And, hey, I'm reading that too. But I can't take any more lessons because it's in the water. And he said, well, then you just go down to, get in a land plane. Oh, okay. So, yeah, I finished up my lessons in Tamiami Airport with my private instructor, commercial, and while I was taking lessons, they told me they needed instructors. So if I finished up my licenses there, I could be one of their instructors and a charter pilot. So that was my life for about 5 years. I had 2 lives. I'd go up to New York and be a flight attendant for TWA on the 747, and then I'd go down to Miami and give instruction and fly charters, mostly over to the Bahamas or around Florida. So yeah, it was good. It was there. I thought that was how I was going to stay until I found out the airline. Women could fly airplanes, they realized, and they were accepting applications. The airlines were accepting applications for women.
How did things change with your kind of outlook on your career as you were kind of had these 2 worlds where in one case, on one hand, at the exact same time, you're a flight attendant with TWA kind of poking your head in the cockpit. On the other hand, here you are piloting, you've soloed, you actually understand the path or something about what's involved in doing that at least. Was that a big turning point?
Let's see how to say this. It could have been more of there were some really good guys at TWA that encouraged me, but the main message I got is, that's really nice you want to do this. This is really, but women just can't. I mean, there's the physical part, and there's, there's a lot of stress and emotion up here, and you can't be emotional, and psychological, and excuse me, your audience, but there's that time of month when you just, aren't going to be able to do anything and should, and we can't schedule around that. I mean, and a lot of these guys were my friends, and I thought we're being honest. Well, and there's a natural progression in the airlines with seniority to captain. And we can't have a woman as a captain. No man in his right mind is going to take orders from a woman. And now you've got a safety issue going on. And then there's the heavies, and no woman can ever fly heavy. So, women getting into the airlines is just really messing everything up. And you're a nice person. Don't do that. I mean, those are the messages that I was truly getting. Yeah. But then I heard that Bonnie had been hired at American and Emily at Frontier. And I wrote to him and I said, is this really true? Are your airlines really letting you fly airplanes? Because the guys had told me, well, yeah, they'll hire him, but it's just a publicity stunt. And they said, no, we're on the seniority list. It's working. The guys get used to it. It's a culture shift. And they said, and you've been a flight attendant, so you're used to the lifestyle, and that's the main thing. So I didn't argue with the guys. There was sometimes when I was up there and they had to go to the bathroom, they'd let me sit in the seat, and I realized later it was to impress upon me how difficult, and they let me take it off autopilot, to impress upon me how difficult this job was and why I just really would never be able to do it. But it worked just the opposite. I mean, well, it's not that hard. And if these guys can do it, certainly I can. So when they'd say, well, I'm sure you understand why, women will never do this, I'm thinking, nope, don't understand that at all. But, we don't need to have that discussion.
One of the things that we pointed out in the book that's interesting is that even the regulations, even the things from the FAA, like there was a time when once a woman, even though women were able to be pilots and get a license, that if you got pregnant, you lost your license and you lost your medical.
That's true. That does go back further than my time. A lady named Betty Gillies, who was a WASP and one of the first female pilots, went to Washington and had that changed. But it was thanks to her. But before that, yeah, you lost your license and you had to start all over. So it's been a journey. We're closer than we've ever been before, but we really do have a ways to go yet. only, I think we're up to 6% now of the commercial airline pilots are women. That's part of the reason for the books and for me giving presentations. I just want women to know it's an incredible career. Just like, well, like what you're saying, you get to see the world, and it's very conducive to family. It's not, because that's one of the questions I get a lot when I'm giving a presentation with young girls, but you're gone all the time. How can you have a family? There's choices of being a pilot, different jobs you can get, different schedules you can have. That I raised 2 boys as a single mom very successfully. They've turned into very nice young men, and was able to be home every night. I had a flight to Tegucigalpa, Honduras to do it, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, you can have a schedule that allows a very nice lifestyle. But back to getting into the airline, I guess my first airline you mentioned was Air Illinois, where do you want that story? How that turned?
Oh, of course, absolutely. I was going to ask you about that. Tell me about your first airline job.
Oh, there's so many stories. Well, I was a flight attendant for TWA, and we had a layover in St. Louis, and my sister lived in Carbondale, so I was going to rent a car and go down to Carbondale and visit her during the 24-hour layover. And as I'm walking the rest of the crew out, who's going to catch the crew bus, I see this little kiosk that says Air Illinois. Next flight, Carbondale in 10 minutes. So I walked up to the pilots, and I'm in my flight attendant uniform, and most of the airlines will give reciprocal agreements to other airline employees. So I said, hey, you're going to Carbondale, can I go along? And they said, sure. And I said, well, do you need my ID, to get a pass? And go, oh, no, sorry, our owner doesn't agree in those reciprocal agreements. You'll have to get a ticket. And I went, oh, okay, well then I'll go get the car. And he said, then finally goes, yeah, we can only take people down if they're coming in for an interview. I said, oh, okay, well then I'll interview. No, we got enough flight attendants. And then the other guy goes, yeah, we're always short on pilots. I said, oh, well then I'll interview as a pilot. And he thought I was kidding. And he goes, not funny. I said, no, seriously, I've got 700 hours from being an instructor and flying charters down in Florida. That's more than I had when I got hired. So he picks up my bags and starts walking, and I start following him, and we go out on the ramp, and here's this twin otter, and he puts me up in a twin otter. The front seat is almost in the cockpit. So he left the door open, put headsets on me so I could talk all the way down to Carbondale. They wanted to know about TWA because, of course, they're building hours to be able to apply to be a TWA pilot. I want to know about what they're doing. So we had a wonderful short flight down to Carbondale. And then while I'm waiting for my sister to come pick me up, I start feeling a little guilty, because what if somebody puts the number of passengers together with the number of tickets and finds out they've just let me come in free? So I went up to the counter and said, I just came in on the flight. I told the guys I was coming in for an interview so I could have a free ride. Can I have an application? And we've got enough flight attendants. I know, I want to interview as a pilot. And she goes, you do? And she goes in the back and gets this guy that comes out. I think he was a colonel in the Canadian Army or something, who owned this airline. They had 3 twin otters and a Hawker, Hawker Siddeley, that flew up to Chicago. But so anyway, he comes out and he goes, so you think you want to be an airline pilot? And he puts his arm around me. And, oh, it's just so embarrassing. And he said, let me take you out and show you the Vic. So he takes me out in the hangar, and here's Vic working on the engine. And I knew enough at that point about jet engines. I was interested in how a turboprop compared with the jet engine, and it made sense to me. So I was able to ask him intelligent questions, I guess, and learn something, and apologized for coming in and taking up his time, and thought that was the end of it, because it was obvious this man did not think women should be flying airplanes that owned the airline. But 2 weeks later, Jennifer was the lady's name at the counter, calls and says, okay, you're training, we've got a training class for you in 2 weeks. Can you be here? And there's no way. Are you sure? He said, yeah. In fact, we hired another woman last month. She's a captain. all right. So my supervisor at TWA, my flight attendant supervisor, knew about my dual life and got me a 9-month leave of absence so that I could go to training at Air Illinois, which lasted, I think, 1 week. And it was mostly on-the-job training. But again, that man comes in during the end of the class and says to me, okay, you're trained. They tell me you're doing great, and we've got another woman, but obviously you two can't fly together. And I don't keep my emotions off my face very well, I guess. What? And said, well, we got to have a man up there in case anything goes wrong, don't we? And we don't want to scare away our passengers, do we? No, sir. I mean, you could say things like that then. And so for 3 months, Emily, and her name was Emily Jones, Captain Emily Jones. And I love knowing that there was a woman captain so that I could go back to TWA and say, yes, women can be captains, and the guys have no problem with it whatsoever. The guys at Air Illinois were wonderful. And then one dark and stormy afternoon, about 3 months later, in fact, it was December 30th, 1977, nobody else could get to the airport except the two of us. And so the dispatcher called the owner and said, we've got 15 people that want to go to St. Louis. What do you want to do? He goes, fine, tell them they can take the airplane, but keep the door closed and nobody makes any announcements. In other words, you can get the passengers there, but they can't know who flew them there. And then I guess since, well, there was no accident and nobody refused to get on the airplane, and they changed the rule and we got to fly together for the next 6 months when I was still there. And got my 1,000 hours of turboprop time, which is what I needed for the application at TWA, and put in an application to all the different airlines. But I was hoping for TWA. That was my family. That was where, and I kind of wanted to show those guys that, yes, I could.
What was the interview process like going through with those airlines?
At that time, it was very extensive. I remember, well, 95% of the pilots at that time were out of the military. So, and all the people interviewing were out of the military. So I couldn't, and I mean, everybody in the military is kind of the same to me, but to them, there was this big difference between the Army and the Navy and the Marines and what the interviews were like. We were talking about all the guys had on the exact same suit. They had all read the same book, Dressed for Success. United had the most extensive. I think that was like 7, you went through 7 different interviews. Delta was the most military. Oh, Delta at the time had a psychologist. You had to talk to a psychologist. And the whole joke was you sat in a rocking chair. Do you rock or not rock? If you got to the physical, you had made it. So you were pretty certain to get accepted if you were sent to the physical and your physical went well. But that was always the last step. There was sometimes something called a Stanine test, a spatial recognition. Sometimes there were written tests, and there were always the logbook check, make sure you didn't have any what they call Parker pen time, ask you a lot of questions. I don't think they ask a lot of the guys these kind of questions about if you can reach. I had to sit in the simulator to be able to show that I could reach the pedals and all the switches and the yoke and the switches above, and what I would do if the captain became incapacitated. If some of the questions were very strange, and it didn't have a lot of the. I know now the interviews have a lot to do with getting along in teamwork, the CRM. There was none of that at the time. It was all, you may have to do this by yourself, and how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
So it was interesting. I was an English and psychology major, so I really enjoyed the psychology behind these interviews and what these guys were asking, but I don't know that it was in doing me any favors. Why are you asking that? So,
that's funny. So ultimately, you got an opportunity and found your way in the cockpit. Was
Well,
that
I got
Seaboard?
it actually ended up being a departmental transfer um, from flight attendant to pilot because I was still on the books at TWA as a flight attendant. And
Ah,
that was unique for their interview. They were concerned that if they hired me as a flight attendant, all the flight attendants would think they could be pilots. And they said, so you're not going to tell all the flight attendants they can be. I said, well, yeah, if they want to go through what I went through to get here, yeah, they can be a pilot. So it was an interesting time, I guess is the best way to put it.
and so what was it like then making that first transition, the first time that you were in the cockpit instead of the cabin?
Um, they were very excited about having us in training. TWA had not hired, a lot of the airlines hadn't hired for like 7 or 8 years. So we were one of the first classes to go through. So training was really excited about having us. It was unique to have women. They hired 3 of us within the first 2 classes, and we quickly became very good friends and supported each other. And I don't know if I would have made it through without those ladies. Terry and Karen were their names, Karen Davies and Terry Foote. We got a house together to be able to room together so that we'd get off flights and go, you wait until I tell you this one. Like I said, most of the time the guys were very supportive, but we did have what we called our 10% turkey factor that made it really difficult. You could smoke in the cockpit then, so they'd find ways to irritate you or upset you or make you wish you weren't there. And in fact, there was a saying that would be said over the radio, even with ATC, from one woman's voice came on the radio, hey, there goes another empty kitchen. And it became this joke, kind of of getting women out of the air and back into the kitchen. And finally, there was a response, no, my husband's taking care of that just fine, thank you. So it was some hazing to be able to be accepted. We didn't get the immediate assumption that the guys did that they knew what they were doing, unless proven otherwise. It was us, we had to prove ourselves each time we got into the cockpit, and we were on reserve, so every time was a new crew. But we found out if you did your job well, you gradually got, and you had to have a sense of humor. Can I tell my funny story?
Please. I'm going to ask you about them anyway. Because I will say the book it's your story, but I love how there are so many funny stories. There just are tons. There's tons. I put the book down and I'd be telling the story to anyone I could talk to.
Good. Well, maybe it helped being an English major too, because I see things, I see stories in life. I see my life as a story, and I liked writing those stories down. And those instructors, the only thing that they wanted, they wouldn't let me pay for the lessons. They had lots of money. The only thing they wanted was stories. And so when I'd go back to visit them, I'd tell them, but so that I wouldn't forget them, I'd write them down, and then I would write them letters and send them these letters that included all these stories and events and with details about, what the engines looked like and what the conversation was. And they kept those letters and later gave me 20 years worth of letters. So that's a lot that's in the book. And that's why many of the stories can be that detailed, because they were written the day after they happened and sent them to these people as letters.
Isn't that wonderful? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I wonder now. People don't write letters, so it's not getting written. Well, and I kept a journal and a diary, and my logbook looked more like a diary than a logbook. So a lot of those stories are written in that way. But yeah, the funny story. So as a TWA flight engineer, we're down in Florida. A hurricane or tropical storm has gone through. Everything's been shut down for 24 hours. The ground's soaked. Hang on just a second, please. Finally, they're releasing airplanes, so we're taxiing out to the runway. We're number 2 for takeoff, and tower says everything's shut down. Air saturation. Too many airplanes in the air right now. It's going to be at least an hour. So might as well shut down engines. So we did. We told the flight attendants they could go ahead and serve the passengers the meals and drinks. That's when you had meals on airplanes, the meals and drinks. And I knew the flight attendants. I'd worked with them. So one of them comes up and says, "Hey, we got a problem in the back. There's a lady there with a seeing eye dog that she picked up, and they're sitting at the bulkhead. But the dog's been in the terminal all day and now's on the airplane, and now she finds out there's another delay, and the dog won't sit still because it has to go to the bathroom. What are we going to do?" And she thought we could maybe taxi back to the gate. And the captain, "No, we're not taxiing back to the gate." So there's all these jokes about how you can help a dog go to the bathroom in the airplane. And I said, "Hey, you know what? We're on a 727. I can drop the aft stairs, and she can take the dog out and let it go to the bathroom. Everybody's got their engines shut down." This was before 9/11. You could do things like this. So the captain called and said, "We're going to drop the stairs if that's okay, and let this lady take her dog off." Fine. So the flight attendant says, "Lynn, do you mind talking to the lady? I'm busy." So I go back to the lady and say, "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm going to drop the stairs in the back, and you'll be able to take your dog out to go to the bathroom." She says, "But honey, I'm blind." Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, there's that.
Yeah, but I can tell the dog that he can go with you. And she hands me the harness, the little short metal harness. So I go up to the cockpit, get my hat and coat so that I can look official, take the dog down the aisle, down the stairs, and that dog sees the grass and goes running for the grass, dragging me behind it, and answer to his prayers, goes into the grass and pulls me along with it. But the grass is so water soaked, my foot, I go knee deep in Florida mud, pull my leg out, and my shoe is still in the hole. So I reach over to get my shoe out of the hole, and my hat, those round hats, goes off my head, goes rolling across the ramp like a frisbee. So the dog, so I've got the shoe in one hand, dog in the other, chasing the hat, finally get the hat, and I'm so glad it's dusk so that nobody can see this. Delta's behind us, and they turn on their wing lights. I'm on stage. So I try to hurry, limping back to the airplane, go up the stairs, give the flight attendant the dog, go in the bathroom and clean up. By the time I get up to the cockpit, the guys are laughing so hard they can hardly tell me what's going on. They're crying. And he said, Delta came on the radio on tower frequency and says, "Hey, TWA, we know this anti-discrimination is the latest thing going on, but don't you think hiring a blind, lame female is taking it a little bit too far?" So, you had to laugh. I wanted to be taken seriously so bad. I did not want to be laughed at, but things like that happen, and you just got to go with the flow, and that usually worked. If most of the stuff that was going on was not being done to me personally. It was just junior high jokes, and you want boys who will be boys to stop, and grow up and be a man. But it gradually happened, and it's happening. But then I keep saying that it was an interesting time to be in aviation. But yeah, so we made it through, three of us. So that was one of the stories I came home to tell Karen and Terry, and they had stories too. And we made it 1 week short of being off probation. And I don't know if probation's the same now, but it was huge to get off probation. You had protection, and your salary doubled, and we were barely making it. You don't make a lot of money. We didn't as beginning engineers. So we were really looking forward to that. And then we were furloughed. So starting all over with, going out, getting in touch with all the airlines that I'd put applications in for before and had done some parts of the interviews, hoping to do an interview again. But Karen's dad was a TWA pilot and had his finger on the pulse of everybody that was hiring. And there was a cargo company called Seaboard World that was hiring pilots based out of JFK. And that's where we were, so it was handy. Let's see.
And it seems like that. I mean, your story of that interview process, in a way, seemed a lot like the Air Illinois one in terms of they wanted you, like the door was open more than it seemed almost.
Well, it was a very unique situation and setup. I'm not sure how, I really didn't, I had just gotten engaged to the young man that had the private pilot handbook on the airplane and talked me into coming down to Tamiami and finishing up my flying lessons. We started dating, and 5 years later, we're engaged. And so I was looking forward to the time off. I thought it was fine being furloughed. I could have some, and he was flying all of the airplanes out of Miami, out of Corrosion Corner. And I thought the Seaboard World interview would be great for him, and invited him to come up, and because Seaboard had DC-8s based in London and 747s based in New York. So they were big airplanes. So he came up for the interview. I drove him to the interview, and while he was being interviewed by Captain Hirschberg, I went in to talk to the secretary, Alice, just to spend the time. She finds out I'm a pilot also and starts asking me all kinds of questions and taking notes, and tells me to go talk to Captain Hirschberg before I leave. And I'm thinking this will help my fiance get hired. And so go in and say hi to Captain Hirschberg, and he's sitting at this big desk, and there's this beautiful model 747 on his desk. And he looks at the sheet of paper that Alice has put in front of him. I find out that Alice was doing the interview basically, and says, how would you like to be the first woman to fly that 747? And I'm almost embarrassed to tell the rest of this story. I say, I don't think women can do that. Because that's what and I could tell from his face it was not what he expected to hear. He had just handed me the best gift anybody could ever give anybody, and I'd gone, oh no, I don't think so. I thought he was maybe joking. I was so used to guys punking me that I thought it was a joke. I didn't know the guy, and he goes, what do you mean? I said, no, I've been a TWA for 7 years, flight attendant, pilot, and all the guys agree that women can't fly the heavies. If two engines go out on one side, there's not enough strength to keep it going straight. So he goes, it's hydraulics. I'll show you. I said, oh, okay. Well, maybe someday when we're in a simulator, you can show me that. Okay. And he says, and you've taken the Stay 9 test? Yeah. Okay, then. Well, we'll be seeing you. Okay. And he stands up, and I shake his hand and I leave. And 2 weeks later, I get the call from Alice saying, okay, we've got a training class set up for you starting in 2 weeks. Can you be here? I said, oh, with my fiance? No, he didn't. He's only got a 2-year degree. You've got we require a 4-year degree, and you've taken the Stay 9 test. And I said no. I turned it down. I said, I can't do that. I can't take that away from him. That's not fair. And she said, well, I'm not going to tell him that you said no. Think about it for a week. And of course, that's all I could think about while I'm vacuuming a pea green rug, thinking I could be flying a 747. So we had a heart-to-heart conversation. Of course, you have to take the job, but you also have to give up the engagement ring. So, but it was the right choice. Yeah, you need somebody in your life that's going to support your decisions and your career, and it was good that I found that out then. Didn't feel that way at the time, but Captain Hirschberg ended up being just a wonderful man, an incredible pilot, and fantastic instructor. I wish I would have realized how much I had to thank him for while he was still around to thank him. So I hope somehow he knows. Maybe the book will help, or his family know that how much he changed my life. And yeah, he took it upon himself to make sure that I had as much confidence in me and the airplane as he did. I got to do a C check. I got to take a 747 literally to the limits, to all the red lines and where all the bells and whistles and stick shakers and everything go off. I got to do that to give me confidence in the airplane. And took me along on my IOE on my first trip and introduced me to all the dispatchers and maintenance people so that they knew that he had confidence in me. And all the guys were fantastic. The Seaboard, yeah. It's fun being here.
Your book opens with that story of him actually testing, putting you in the cockpit and putting you in that situation that you've been told couldn't happen. Tell us
Exactly.
about that.
Whew. Well, I didn't expect it. I was a first officer, and first officers don't have to show that. I think maybe they did on the captain check. I don't even think then. But since I had said I didn't think that could happen, I guess he had it in his mind that at some point he would show me. And it was actually his check ride. He also flew in addition to being the chief pilot, so he had to stay current. So it was his currency check, and he showed up when my sim partner and I were being checked out. So we were in the sim building at the same time. Found me and said, "Hey, I need a first officer to go through my check ride." Well, you're not going to say no to the chief pilot, so sure. And I loved watching him fly. He made it like an art. I mean, he could set the throttles and not touch them again on downwind, and then slow down just based on putting down flaps and gear at the right time, and just have to add a little bit before the flare. It was, like I said, it was an art form. I just loved watching him fly. He just made it look so easy and smooth, and he was so in control. So I served as his first officer, and then he said, "Well, I think we got done so fast. We've got a little more time. Is it okay if Lynn shows me what she knows?" And of course, you know, the FAA's in the seat though, and sure. So we take off, and sure enough, he sets up the scenario that, well, I was expecting the first one. I mean, you're in a simulator, so of course you have an engine failure. Fine. Well, then you do a go around, truck on the runway, and I'm going, no, there's not. Yes, there is. So, you know, single engine go around, and then on downwind, sure enough, second engine goes out. And I don't know why. Why would he do that to me? It was with the FAA there, you know, because he was a nice guy. And so then I'm going, okay, quit asking, you know, questions, just fly the plane. And I did. It went okay, went well. Didn't use enough trim, but got it on the ground. And as we taxi in, and the other two guys leave, and my leg was so, well, to do this, well, pilots know, you've got to put so much rudder pressure in that I had my hip locked into the seat, my knee locked out for the whole approach. And by the time we were done, my leg was dead. I didn't know if I was going to be able to stand up. And so I said to him, why would you do that to me? You know, and with the FAA here, and yeah, I thought you were going to help me. And he goes, I am helping you. Now you know you can do it. I'm not having you up there thinking you can't do something that you can. You're welcome. And the next time, use more rudder trim. Oh, well, in that case, thank you very much. And I meant it with all my heart. And then he goes, if you let me, I'll carry your flight bag. Yeah, you can carry my flight bag. So yeah, wonderful memories like that of good guys that I wouldn't be here without, I guess. And this group of them, the Seaboard guys, are some of the best.
That's wonderful. So you found yourself after that, your career included People Express, for those of us who can remember that airline.
Yes, Seaboard merged with Flying Tigers, and I was at the bottom of the seniority list. I was the last that they had hired, so I was the first to be furloughed. Again, I think 2 weeks short of being off probation. So I was looking for an airline, started interviewing all over again, and People Express had just started up. Well, this was during deregulation, so there were all what they call the upstarts, and there were airlines all over the place.
I will say this book there's a fascinating, and this is, I believe, in your second book. It's a fascinating story of the culture of deregulation and People Express, and what it was like to do that. It's a very interesting insight into what was happening during that time in the airlines.
I'm glad you think so. I wanted to put that in there because it's a very, you're right, it's a very interesting time in aviation history, very unique. And People Express made the most of it, I think, more than any other airline. The people that started People Express came from Lorenzo's Texas Air. So I don't know if people remember kind of the Darth Vader of the airline industry. That there had to be a nice way to treat employees. And the best way they could think of was to have the employees, the flight attendants, pilots, and maintenance guys also run the airline. Hire the people that they wanted to work with and train the people the way they thought they should be trained. So in addition to being a pilot or being on the airplane, you chose a on-ground position. And I loved it. I mean, well, it wasn't for everybody. So there were some people that we would interview that weren't interested in doing anything other than being on the airplane. But that's why you have the interview. You just find people that want to work together. And we did. We did a fantastic job of finding a group of people. Well, and we were all young, in 20s and 30s, having a great time. We had the 737s, excuse me, and then got more, and then finally did get 72s and the 747. But
it was just really fascinating to me, the dichotomy of, I mean, as a passenger, when you think of, you know, that deregulation and People Express, you have an idea of flying on a discount airline and some of the other passengers and some of the challenges of that. But from an employee perspective and a culture perspective, it's almost like Camelot and a renaissance of what it's like and what it could be like to work for an airline. And the idea that you didn't follow the same seniority rules or follow all the same uniform rules or roles and responsibilities is amazing. And I also thought it was interesting that you mentioned that ultimately it was the FAA that came in and said some of those rules are going to have to change and you're going to have to go back to regular uniforms. You're going to have to go back to seniority.
Yes, when we started flying international, I think is when it happened. When the 747 started going international, we needed to get more normal. Just, I don't know why. I was going to try to give an explanation, but yeah, up until then, there were no stripes, no hats. The motto was, it takes a team. Nobody's more important than anybody else. Everybody's going to have to work together, and we did. And I loved it. I liked that culture very much, and the people that got hired and the people that stayed there. Well, and I was in recruiting, so I got to help find people who enjoyed that kind of airline and that kind of culture to work in, and get to work with them. And after being at places where guys were surprised when they got in the cockpit and there was a woman there, I thought, if I'm in recruiting, they're going to know from the very beginning, from the interview, that they're going to be flying with women.
That's great. There's also quite a few things in there I would let people know to further motivate everybody to get these books and read them. There's really stories of interesting things with that we can all learn from as pilots. With your stories of kind of things that certain pilots did that you flew with, not always good things, that are a little bit of kind of lessons that anyone who's commanding an aircraft from an airliner down to a Cub can learn from.
Well, and I guess that's what sticks in your mind too, are the things that stand out are the really good and the really bad. So, and yeah, the most interesting.
Transitioning into something. Oh, go ahead.
You can learn. I think you learn a lot of times from how not to do something, and as well as how to do something. So, yes, there's some lessons there.
Your second book goes into something that I know is very dear to your heart, and that is Honduras and flying into Honduras. And it starts with this, what's involved in airline transportation into the TCU airport. Tell us about that, and then your work with Roatan.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the TGU. Actually, the area is called Tonkantine Airport, but it's Tegucigalpa, or Tegucigalpa is the name of the city. It's the capital of Honduras, and it's where the airport was. They've moved it now, so I can't say it is. Finally, they moved it. It was one of the most, if not the most, well, it was the most dangerous airport to go into in Continental system. By the time I was flying in there, People Express had merged with Continental. So it was a Continental 737 I was taking in there. And the reason I was taking it in there was it was the one place I could fly that I could drop the kids off at school, have a flight, and come back and pick them up from school. It's only a 2-hour and 20-minute flight, which totally baffled their teachers. They couldn't believe I could drop the kids off and go to Central America and be back in time to pick them up, but that's what I did. And it was special entry airport because there was no electronic guidance. It's high altitude, and it's 3,300 feet, and then it's surrounded by mountains. So it's a visual only landing, and you have to make the approach inside that bowl of mountains and know from experience what speed, what configuration, and what altitude you need to be on all the way around to make that very tight turn at the end with a 40 flap landing. And as you're coming down, the mountain behind you is coming down at the, so you're constantly getting a terrain, pull up, whoop, that you're ignoring for the only time in your life to make this landing. But yeah, you had to do it, well, there were all kinds, it was a captain only landing. You had to be trained. You had to do it at least every 90 days. But something you had to do a lot or not at all. And I got good at it and enjoyed it. And my chief pilot, when I first signed up for it, said, you know, why are you signing up for this? What are you trying to pull? I don't have any instructors right now. And why do you want to do this? I said, it matches my kid's school schedule. It wasn't a normal reason for a pilot to want to have a certain flight. So, but it worked for me. It worked for us. So going in there, we always had, excuse me again a minute. We always had missionaries on board who were going down to help the schools and the clinics, and they were bringing in supplies. So I got to meet some of them and ask them what supplies they needed. I was always coming in. I didn't need it. It was a turn, so I didn't have an overnight bag. I had room in the cockpit. So I started taking things in for them that they needed. And then started doing it on my days off and taking other friends down to help out. And we just, I don't know, there was so much need, and I had the ability to fill the need. So, you know, why not? But then we found out about a little island off on the north shore called Roatan. And it had even more need because they had built a clinic that they couldn't open because the electricity was so expensive. They didn't have any electricity. So the pilots played in a band with the mayor. It was amazing how things just line up when the universe creates this path of things to happen so that things happen. And I talked to the mayor's wife, and she said the best idea to raise money to make money for the electricity was to bring in used athletic shoes that their daughters who needed community service hours for their college applications could sell. So as a traveling on a pass as an employee, I could bring in 2 70-pound boxes, and I found an athletic shoe store that was willing to donate their used shoes. If somebody brought in a used pair, they'd give them 20% off of their next pair. And they catered mostly to marathon runners that were constantly getting new shoes, really high quality shoes. So we raised enough money to open that clinic. And then of course the clinic needed, well, medicines and and funds for doctor and nurse and run it. And then people found out that I could bring things in, so the other clinics wanted things, and then we started a soccer league, and and so they needed, my kids played soccer, so I was able to bring in addition to the other shoes, soccer shoes, and then soccer uniforms. And okay, I keep asking permit. Can I tell this really good? My favorite story of the success story that we had down there was brought in enough soccer shoes and gear and the ball and everything that we were able to create a soccer league. And for the first time, the mainland recognized the teams on the island and invited the 14, 15-year-olds to play in a tournament. And the tournaments are where the coaches watch, or the people watching for the main team's called Olympia. It's the scouts. The scouts are watching for talent for Olympia. And 4 of the kids got chosen to be sponsored, which means they pay for their training. They pay for them to have this possibility of, you know, a better life. And so we were able to change the rule. It used to be the soccer was set up to keep the kids off the street that weren't going to school. But it was so popular that we could make the rule that you had to be in school to be able to be on that team. It was called the Pirates, the Pirates. You had to be in school to be on that team to have the chance to go to these tournaments. And I got to take down an oxygen concentrator one time, an autoclave, things that they needed to do another surgery. Otherwise, you get to save lives.
Isn't that wonderful?
It was fantastic. So I started a nonprofit when I retired. Well, they still needed things after I retired, and I didn't realize how much money I was spending while I was working, which I could do while I had an income, but once I was retired, it wasn't working out quite so well. But some friends solved that problem and said, well, you just need to start a nonprofit. So we started something called Roatan Support Effort, or ROSE. And the book, in fact, is also a fundraiser for that nonprofit that you can order on my website. Is it okay if I give a little plug?
Of course, absolutely.
www.lynnrippelmeyer.com. It's very simple.
Absolutely.
And you can order the book there, and that way you can get a signed copy. If you want something special in it, let me know. And the money goes towards ROSE. You can also order it on Amazon, and I've even seen it now with other book companies selling it. So there's a lot of places you can get it, but the only place you can get it and have the money go to ROSE and have it signed is if you get it from my website. So please do that.
Absolutely. So www.lynnrippelmeyer.com, and I cannot recommend the book enough. There are pictures in the book as well, and in both the books I'll show a quick thing, which is this the TGU approach coming in here, which is wonderful, and so many more things that you can see of Lynn flying back then, and I love this one. You made it onto Jeopardy.
Yes, yeah, they did not. That was a shock to me, but yeah, that's, as my son says, no, you've made it. I said, no, I need to be an answer on a crossword puzzle yet.
Isn't that absolutely wonderful? Well, Lynn, thank you so much for taking time to join us this evening on SocialFlight Live. Your story's wonderful. The book, again, Life Takes Wings. It's just a wonderful read. A lot to learn from this, a great story, and in addition to that, as you mentioned, it helps your foundation, ROSE, for the Roatan relief. And so thank you so much for taking time to join us here on SocialFlight Live.
Oh, Jeff, thanks for the invitation. It was fun.
Absolutely, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, I will. You too.
And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your evening to join us here for another show of SocialFlight Live. We'll be back next Tuesday, that's May 2nd at 8 p.m. with the Hurricane Hunters, pilots of the P-3 Orion, going into the eye of the hurricane and mapping things out for NOAA, helping to study those so people can prepare on the ground and do as much as we can to save both life and property. It's going to be a fascinating evening with the pilots from NOAA Hurricane Hunters. In addition, on Tuesday, May 9th, Heather Penny, the F-16 pilot from 9/11 that was here on our show, will be back, and this time talking about national defense strategy in her current job. that she works with aviation and studying what is the latest in terms of what's happening around the globe in America's preparedness when it comes to aviation and our national defense. It's absolutely fascinating, the work that she does with the Mitchell Institute, and I'm sure it's going to be an extremely enlightening evening for everyone. Until next time, again, thank you so much for taking time to support general aviation, to support SocialFlight, and join us for these great shows with incredibly inspirational people. And I wish you all blue skies.